The bus rumbled to a stop at the edge of Mercer's Hollow on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I stepped down onto cracked pavement, my joints protesting the movement after 6 hours of travel from Philadelphia. The driver handed me my 2 suitcases. Everything I owned now fit in 2 bags. A humbling realization for someone who once filled a 4-bedroom house. The town stretched before me like a postcard from another era. Main Street curved gently upward, lined with brick storefronts that hadn't changed since the 1950s. A hardware store, a diner, a pharmacy with an old-fashioned soda fountain visible through the window. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks just beginning to show autumn colors. I had chosen Mercer's Hollow for its simplicity. After my daughter Yasmin stopped returning my calls, after my son Garrett made it clear I was no longer welcome in his life, after my late husband's family contested his will and won, leaving me with almost nothing, I needed to disappear. This town of fewer than 800 souls seemed like the perfect place to fade away. The real estate agent, a nervous woman named Darla Mitchum, had arranged to meet me at the rental cottage at 3 o'clock. I checked my watch. 2:15. Plenty of time to grab something to eat and get my bearings. I pulled my suitcases toward the diner, their wheels catching on the uneven sidewalk. That's when I noticed the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like the moment before thunder. The streets were completely empty. Every storefront displayed a small sign in the window, all identical, all bearing the same message in careful script, closed daily at noon. My stomach tightened. I'd traveled through countless small towns in my years of advocacy work, from Mississippi to Montana, but I'd never seen anything quite like this. The doors weren't just closed, they were sealed, some with additional locks visible through the glass. The diner's blinds were drawn. The pharmacy had what looked like a security gate pulled halfway down. A movement caught my eye. Across the street, a curtain twitched in a second-story window. Someone was watching me. The curtain fell back into place immediately, but I'd seen enough to know I wasn't alone, even if the streets suggested otherwise. I stood there for a long moment, my hands gripping the suitcase handles, feeling the weight of my 71 years in my lower back. The September sun beat down on my shoulders, and I could feel sweat beginning to form under my collar. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to heal. Instead, I felt like I'd walked onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. A truck approached from the far end of Main Street, moving slowly. As it passed, the driver, a man with a weathered face and a John Deere cap, stared at me with such intensity that I took a step backward. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just stared. Then he was gone, turning down a side street that led toward what looked like farmland. I pulled out my phone to call Darla, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I'd been warned that cell service was spotty in the mountains, but I hadn't expected it to be completely absent. A payphone stood outside the pharmacy, one of those ancient things I hadn't seen in years. I walked over to it, each step echoing in the empty street. The phone was dead. The receiver hung limply from a cut cord. That's when I heard the church bell. It rang 3 times, clear and insistent. From somewhere behind the buildings, I heard an engine start, then another. Within minutes, doors began to open. People emerged from their homes and businesses, moving with purpose but not urgency. They didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. They simply went about their business as if the last 3 hours of absolute closure had never happened. The diner's lights flickered on. The pharmacy's security gate rolled up. Within 15 minutes, Main Street looked like any other small town in America, except for one thing: no one would meet my eyes. I entered the diner, the bell above the door announcing my arrival. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward me, and I felt the weight of their collective gaze. An older man at the counter, probably close to my age, cleared his throat and went back to his coffee. The others followed suit, but I could feel them watching from the corners of their eyes. A waitress approached, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a practiced smile that didn't reach them. Her name tag read Bethany. She held a menu but didn't hand it to me right away. "Kitchen's still warming up," she said. Her accent was mountain soft, musical almost. "Might be a 20-minute wait." "That's fine," I replied, settling into a booth by the window. "I'll take coffee while I wait." She nodded and walked away, and I noticed how her shoulders tensed, how she leaned in to whisper something to the cook through the service window. He glanced at me, frowned, then disappeared into the back. The coffee arrived in a thick ceramic mug, strong and bitter. I wrapped my hands around it, seeking comfort in its warmth, despite the September heat. Through the window, I watched the town come back to life, watched people move through their routines with the precision of choreography, and I wondered what I had gotten myself into. Chapter 2. Darla Mitchum arrived at exactly 3 o'clock, driving a pristine white sedan that seemed out of place on the dusty roads. She was younger than she'd sounded on the phone, perhaps 45, with carefully styled blonde hair and nervous hands that fluttered like trapped birds when she spoke. "Mrs. Traoré, I'm so sorry I wasn't here to greet you earlier," she said, pronouncing my name correctly without hesitation. That alone told me she'd done her research. "So I hope you weren't waiting too long." "I managed," I said, not mentioning the closed shops or the strange 3-hour silence. I wanted to see if she would bring it up first. She didn't. Instead, she drove me through winding roads that climbed steadily upward, away from Main Street and into residential areas where houses sat on large lots, separated by dense stands of trees. She chatted about the weather, about the beautiful foliage that would arrive in a few weeks, about how peaceful and safe Mercer's Hollow was. Her voice had a rehearsed quality, like she was reciting from a script she'd memorized. The cottage sat at the end of a gravel driveway, a small clapboard structure painted pale yellow with white trim. It had a covered porch with a swing, 2 rocking chairs, and flower boxes that still held the remnants of summer petunias. Woods pressed close on 3 sides. "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. The isolation felt like a blessing after the intensity of the town center. Darla seemed to relax slightly. The owners, the Kensington family, moved to Florida last year for health reasons. They wanted to keep it in good condition rather than sell, so they're renting it furnished. "Everything you need should be here." She handed me the keys and showed me through the cottage. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances from the 80s, a living room with a stone fireplace. Simple, clean, quiet. The furniture was worn but comfortable, the kind that conformed to your body over time. "One thing," Darla said as we stood on the porch. Her nervous hands had stilled, and she looked at me directly for the first time. "The town has some customs, traditions that go back a long way. Wednesday afternoons, shops close at noon and don't reopen until 3. It's been that way since before I was born. Most folks use that time for family, church meetings and that sort of thing." "And other days?" I asked, thinking of the Tuesday closure I'd witnessed. She hesitated. "Well, Tuesdays too. And Thursdays. Really. It's most afternoons. The town just slows down. People appreciate their rest." Her smile returned, bright and brittle. "You'll get used to it. Everyone does. What if there's an emergency? There's a volunteer fire department. Deputy sheriff makes rounds. We take care of our own here. Mrs. Traoré." She paused. "One more thing. There's a town meeting every Sunday evening at 6 at the community center. It's optional, but most people attend. It's a good way to meet your neighbors, stay informed about local affairs." After she left, I sat on the porch swing and watched the afternoon light filter through the trees. The forest around the cottage was alive with sound, birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant rush of water that suggested a creek somewhere nearby. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I felt watched. I went inside and unpacked my suitcases, hanging my few clothes in the bedroom closet, arranging my toiletries in the bathroom, placing my late husband's photograph on the nightstand. Marcus smiled at me from behind the glass, forever frozen at 58, before the cancer, before the long decline, before his family swooped in like vultures to claim everything they believed I didn't deserve. "What have I gotten us into?" I whispered to his image. That night I lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to sounds I couldn't identify. Around midnight, I heard vehicles on the road below, multiple trucks, moving slowly without headlights. I got up and peered through the bedroom curtains, but could see only darkness and the occasional shadow moving between trees. When I finally slept, I dreamed of locked doors and watching eyes, of a town that held its breath and waited for something I couldn't name. Chapter 3. I woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the smell of wood smoke. Someone nearby was burning leaves, that quintessential autumn scent that always made me think of childhood in Detroit, before my parents moved us south, before I learned what it meant to be black in America during the civil rights movement. After coffee and toast, I decided to walk into town. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of the winter to come. The gravel driveway crunched under my feet as I made my way to the main road. It was a good 2 miles into town, but I'd walked farther during marches and protests. My body might be 71, but my spirit was still willing. The walk took me past modest homes with neat yards, past a small cemetery where headstones dated back to the 1800s, past a church with a white steeple that gleamed in the morning sun. A few people were out, an elderly man collecting his mail, a woman watering her garden, but no one acknowledged me. They simply turned away, their movements deliberate. Main Street was already bustling when I arrived just before 9. The hardware store was open, its proprietor sweeping the sidewalk with slow, methodical strokes. The diner had several customers visible through the windows. The pharmacy's lights were on. I needed groceries, so I headed to what the sign proclaimed was Holloway's Market, serving the community since 1952. The store was small but well stocked, its narrow aisles crammed with everything from canned goods to cleaning supplies. A young woman stood behind the register, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. I gathered what I needed: bread, milk, eggs, coffee, some vegetables, and brought them to the counter. The young woman began scanning items without looking at me. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. She glanced up, startled, and I saw fear flash across her face before she schooled her expression. "Morning," she muttered. "I'm Delphine Traoré. I just moved into the Kensington cottage." "I know." She bagged my groceries with trembling hands. "That'll be $42.78. I paid cash. I'd learned long ago to keep emergency money on hand, and she made change quickly, clearly eager for me to leave. But something in her distress called to my old instincts, the ones that had driven me to advocate for others for so many years. "Are you all right?" I asked gently. Her eyes filled with tears. "You should leave," she whispered, "before Sunday. Just pack up and go." "Why would I do that?" She shook her head violently, and I saw her gaze dart to the security camera mounted in the corner. "Please, just go." Then, louder, as if performing for whoever might be watching, "Thank you for shopping at Holloway's. Have a blessed day." I took my groceries and left, but the encounter stayed with me. That young woman was terrified. Of what? Of whom? I spent the rest of the morning exploring the town, noting details. The community center was a large building near the church, its parking lot empty. Our small library occupied a converted house, its hours posted as Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to noon. The post office was tiny, run by a man who took my change of address form without comment. At precisely noon, I was standing outside the hardware store when the owner flipped his sign to "Cabinet closed." Within minutes, every business on Main Street did the same. The transformation was so coordinated it had to be planned. Chapter 4. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the town empty itself. People walked quickly to their cars or homes, their faces set in identical expressions of careful neutrality. No one ran, but no one dawdled either. Within 15 minutes, Main Street was deserted again, except for me. I walked slowly down the center of the street, my footsteps echoing off the brick storefronts. At the diner, I could see Bethany and the cook inside, but the lights were off, the blinds half drawn. At the pharmacy, I saw movement in the back room, but the front was dark and locked. Then I heard it, singing, faint at first, then growing stronger. Hymns, the old kind, the ones my grandmother used to sing in the Baptist church in Detroit. The sound was coming from the community center. I walked toward it, drawn by the familiar melodies. The parking lot was full now, though I hadn't seen anyone drive in. Trucks, sedans, SUVs, all arranged in neat rows. Through the windows, I could see people gathered inside, standing in rows, singing with an intensity that raised the hair on my arms. The front door was slightly ajar. I approached and pushed it open wider, and the singing stopped as if cut with a knife. Every face turned toward me. There must have been 200 people crammed into that space, nearly a quarter of the town's population. They stood in organized rows, youngest in front, oldest in back, all dressed in their Sunday best, even though it was Thursday. At the front of the room stood a man I hadn't seen before, tall and angular, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying easily in the sudden silence. "You must be Mrs. Traoré. We've been expecting you." I stood in the doorway, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I'd never been one to back down. "You have the advantage. I don't know you." "Reverend Nathaniel Quince," he said, gesturing for me to enter. "I lead the congregation here in Mercer's Hollow. Please, join us." We were just about to discuss community matters. I thought this was a hymn service. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "In Mercer's Hollow, all matters are spiritual matters, Mrs. Traoré. Everything we do serves a higher purpose." I stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind me. Someone, I didn't see who, locked it. The click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot. Reverend Quince gestured to an empty chair in the front row. "Please, sit." I remained standing. "I think I'll observe from here if it's all the same to you." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw something calculating in his gaze, something that assessed and categorized and decided. "As you wish. But you should know that in this community, we believe in participation. Observers don't last long here. Is that a threat?" "It's a statement of fact." He turned back to the assembled crowd. "Now, where were we? Ah, yes, we were discussing the upcoming Harvest Festival. Darla, would you give us the update?" Darla Mitchum stood from the third row, her nervous energy even more pronounced. "We've confirmed the vendors and set up the schedule. The festival will run from Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. All proceeds will go to the community fund, as always." "Excellent." Reverend Quince looked around the room. "And the special program, is everything in place?" A murmur went through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably. In the back row, I saw the young woman from the grocery store, her head bowed, tears streaming down her face. The older woman next to her, her mother, perhaps, had an arm around her shoulders, but her expression was hard, unyielding. "The program is ready," said a man I recognized as the hardware store owner. "We've made all necessary arrangements." Reverend Quince nodded. "Good. Remember, everyone, this is for the greater good. Our community has thrived for decades because we understand sacrifice, because we know that sometimes individual needs must be set aside for collective welfare. This is what separates Mercer's Hollow from the chaos beyond our borders." I felt sick. There was something deeply wrong here, something that went far beyond afternoon closures and mandatory meetings. This was organized control, sophisticated and complete. I'd seen it before, in places where power concentrated in the hands of a few and everyone else learned to look away. "Mrs. Traoré," Reverend Quince said suddenly, his attention snapping back to me, "I understand you have a background in advocacy work. Civil rights, wasn't it? Voting access, police accountability, that sort of thing." How did he know that? I'd told no one in this town about my past. I did community organizing, yes. Admirable work, I'm sure, though perhaps not relevant here. We don't have such problems in Mercer's Hollow. Our community is harmonious. We take care of our own, in our own way. "Every community needs advocates," I said carefully. "People to speak up when something's wrong." His smile widened. "But what if nothing is wrong? What if we've simply found a better way to live? Sometimes, Mrs. Traoré, the greatest act of wisdom is recognizing when to accept what is, rather than trying to change it." I met his gaze steadily. "I've never been very good at acceptance when I see injustice." "No," he said softly. "I don't suppose you have. That's going to be a problem." Chapter 5. The meeting lasted another hour, covering mundane topics: fundraising for the volunteer fire department, maintenance on the water treatment plant, upcoming events. But beneath the ordinary discussions, I sensed currents of control, subtle threats wrapped in pleasant language. People spoke only when called upon. No one disagreed with Reverend Quince. When the young woman from the grocery store was asked to volunteer for a festival booth, she agreed in a voice so quiet I barely heard it, even though fresh tears ran down her cheeks. When they finally unlocked the door and let me leave, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I walked quickly back toward Main Street, aware of eyes tracking my movement from the community center windows. The shops were reopening at 3, just as Darla had said. People emerged from the community center and dispersed to their businesses, their homes, their routines. The machinery of the town hummed back to life as if nothing unusual had happened. I was halfway to my cottage when a truck pulled up beside me. The driver was the same man I'd seen watching me on my first day, still wearing his John Deere cap. He rolled down his window. "You walked a long way," he said. "Not a question. Need a ride?" My legs were aching and dusk was coming, but I'd learned long ago to trust my instincts about people, and something about this man seemed different from the others, less afraid. "That would be kind of you," I said, climbing into the passenger seat. He drove in silence for a while, his weathered hands steady on the wheel. Finally, as we turned onto the road leading to my cottage, he spoke. "Name's Dorian Farrell. I run a farm up past your place. Delphine Traoré. I know. Everyone knows." He paused. "You caused quite a stir, walking into that meeting. I didn't know it was private. Everything's private in Mercer's Hollow. You'll learn that soon enough." He pulled into my driveway and put the truck in park, but left the engine running. "I'm going to give you some advice, Mrs. Traoré, because you seem like a decent person, and because my late wife would want me to. Leave. Tonight if you can. Tomorrow if you can't. Don't wait for Sunday." "Why? What happens Sunday?" He stared out the windshield at the darkening woods. "The Harvest Festival starts Friday. Sunday is when they make their offering. Girl from the grocery store, Cassidy Holloway, she's this year's chosen one." My blood ran cold. "Chosen for what?" "I can't say more. If they knew I was talking to you." He shook his head. "Just go. There's no shame in it. Plenty of people have tried to change things here. None of them succeeded. Most of them left. The ones who didn't—" He didn't finish the sentence. I climbed out of the truck, my mind racing. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Farrell." "Dorian," he corrected. "And you're welcome. I hope I don't see you Sunday." He drove away, leaving me standing in the gathering darkness, wondering what kind of nightmare I'd stumbled into. Chapter 6. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, writing down everything I'd observed, the coordinated closures, the mandatory meetings, the fear in Cassidy's eyes, the reference to an offering. I thought about calling the state police, but my phone still had no signal, and I suspected the landline in the cottage was monitored. I thought about what Dorian had said. Leave. It would be so easy. Pack my 2 suitcases, walk down to the main road at first light, flag down a passing truck. I could be in the next county by noon, on a bus to somewhere else by evening, start over again, find another small town, another quiet place to disappear. But then I thought of Cassidy, of her tear-stained face and whispered warning, of the other people I'd seen in that meeting, their expressions carefully blank, their compliance absolute. I thought of all the years I'd spent fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves, of the promises I'd made to stand up against injustice wherever I found it. Marcus's photograph watched me from the bedroom. "What would you do?" I whispered to it. But I knew the answer. Marcus had always been the practical one, the one who urged caution and careful planning. I was the impulsive one, the one who threw herself into causes without counting the cost. It had led to our greatest successes and our deepest sorrows, and it had cost me my children. The memory hit like a physical blow. Yasmin, my bright, ambitious daughter, begging me to stop the protests, to think of her career, to understand that my activism was embarrassing her in front of her corporate colleagues. Garrett, my son, angry that I'd been arrested at a demonstration instead of attending his daughter's baptism. Both of them gradually pulling away until the phone calls stopped, until the holidays passed without contact, until I realized I'd chosen the cause over my family once too often. Marcus's death had been the final fracture. His family, wealthy and conservative, had never approved of our marriage or my work. When he died, they contested his will, claiming undue influence, diminished capacity, anything to keep me from inheriting what he'd wanted me to have. My children had sided with them, had testified that I'd manipulated their father, that I'd cared more about strangers than my own family. They'd won. I'd lost everything except what I could fit in 2 suitcases. And now here I was, faced with another choice: walk away and protect myself, or stay and try to help people who hadn't asked for my help, who might not even want it. I was still sitting at that table when dawn broke, no closer to a decision. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more and more content. Chapter 7. Friday morning arrived with fog so thick I could barely see the trees at the edge of the yard. I made coffee and stood on the porch, watching grey wisps curl through the branches like searching fingers. The Harvest Festival would begin tonight. I had 2 days to figure out what was really happening in Mercer's Hollow. I walked into town again, my joints protesting the cold, the fog muffled sound making the world feel unreal, dreamlike. Main Street was already decorated for the festival. Orange and gold bunting hung from lampposts. Hay bales and corn stalks arranged artfully outside businesses. A banner stretched across the street proclaiming Mercer's Hollow Harvest Festival. celebrating community, tradition, and sacrifice. That last word made my skin crawl. Holloway's market was open. I went inside, ostensibly to buy more coffee, but really to see if I could talk to Cassidy again. Instead, I found an older man behind the register, his resemblance to Cassidy unmistakable. A father, probably. "Help you?" he asked curtly. "Just browsing." He watched me with undisguised suspicion as I walked the aisles. When I brought coffee to the register, he rang it up without speaking. "Your daughter was very helpful when I was here before," I said casually. "Is she working today?" His jaw tightened. "Cassidy's busy preparing for the festival. She won't be in the store again until Monday." "If ever," his tone suggested. "She seemed upset when I saw her. I hope everything's all right." He leaned across the counter, his voice low and dangerous. "You need to mind your own business, Mrs. Traoré. Cassidy's situation is a family matter, a community matter. It doesn't concern you, doesn't it? When a young woman is clearly in distress, she's honored to serve the community. We all are. This is how things work here, how they've always worked. Outsiders don't understand. They can't understand." He practically threw my change at me. "Tyson, now leave my store." I left, but not before I saw the photograph taped to the wall behind the register. Cassidy in a white dress, smiling, younger, happier. A memorial photo, or something else. I spent the rest of the morning walking the town, trying to piece together the puzzle. I visited the library, where a middle-aged librarian pointedly ignored my questions about the town's history. I stopped by the church, finding it locked, a sign on the door directing everyone to the community center for all services and gatherings. It was at the cemetery that I found the first real clue. The graveyard behind the church was old, its headstones weathered and tilting. I walked among them, reading names and dates, looking for patterns, and I found them. Every 20 years or so, going back to the 1850s, there was a grave for a young woman, always between 18 and 25, always dying in late October. Sarah Kensington, 1852, Emma Pratchett, 1873, Ruth Danvers, 1892. The list went on, a regular rhythm of young lives cut short. The most recent was from 20 years ago. Jennifer Quince, age 22, beloved daughter, Reverend Quince's daughter. Far interesting reading, isn't it? I spun around. Reverend Quince stood a few feet away, having approached without sound on the grass. His silver hair gleamed even in the fog. "Your daughter," I said, gesturing to the headstone. "Yes, 20 years ago this Sunday." He moved closer, studying Jennifer's grave with an expression I couldn't read. She was beautiful, talented, full of life. And she understood sacrifice in a way few people do anymore. What happened to her? She gave herself for the community, as all the chosen ones do. He looked at me directly. "You've figured it out by now, haven't you? You're an intelligent woman. You've seen the pattern. A pattern of young women dying. A pattern of young women saving us all." He gestured broadly at the town beyond the cemetery. "Mercer's Hollow has survived economic depressions, floods, epidemics, wars. Do you know why? Because we understand the old ways, the covenant our founders made with this land. Every generation, we choose someone to renew that covenant. Someone pure, someone willing. It's an honor." I felt rage building in my chest, hot and fierce. "You're talking about human sacrifice. I'm talking about community survival, about people who understand that individual lives matter less than collective welfare. Your generation believed in that once. Didn't you, Mrs. Traoré? Wasn't that what the civil rights movement was about? People willing to suffer, to die even, for the greater good? That's not the same thing at all, isn't it? The only difference is that our cause isn't fashionable. Our sacrifice happens privately instead of on television." He stepped closer, and I resisted the urge to back away. "You've spent your life fighting for people who didn't always want your help, who sometimes resented your interference. How did that work out for you? Where are your children now, your grandchildren? What do you have to show for all your noble struggles?" The words struck like blows, each one finding its target. Chapter 8. "Get away from me," I said, my voice shaking. Reverend Quince smiled. "I'm simply being honest with you. You sacrificed your family for your principles. How is that different from what we do here? At least we're transparent about the cost. I never killed anyone, didn't you? How many relationships did your activism destroy? How many people did you alienate in pursuit of abstract justice? He gestured back toward Jennifer's grave. My daughter volunteered. She understood that her death would ensure the survival of hundreds of people, that her sacrifice would be remembered and honored. Can you say your sacrifices accomplished as much? I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that there was no comparison between fighting for civil rights and murdering young women in the name of superstition. But the words stuck in my throat, because part of what he said was true. I had lost my family. I had chosen the cause over my children, over and over, until they stopped giving me chances to choose them. Reverend Quint saw my hesitation and pressed his advantage. Leave Mercer's Hollow, Mrs. Traoré. This isn't your fight. You've fought enough, sacrificed enough. Go somewhere quiet, somewhere you can rest. Let us continue our traditions in peace. And Cassidy, what about her? Cassidy has been prepared for this her entire life. Her family is honored. The community celebrates her. She will be remembered forever. She's terrified. She's human. Fear is natural. But she'll do her duty, just as all the others have, just as my Jennifer did. His voice softened, and for the first time, I heard genuine emotion in it. It doesn't get easier watching them go, but it's necessary. Without the covenant, Mercer's Hollow dies. Everything ends. 200 years of community, of tradition, of people taking care of each other, all gone. Is one life too high a price to pay to prevent that? I wanted to scream that, yes, it was too high a price, that no tradition justified murder. But I thought of the vibrant, living town I'd seen, of the way people helped each other, of the preservation of something increasingly rare in modern America, genuine community, connection, mutual care. What if he was right? What if their prosperity, their survival, somehow depended on this terrible act? No, I couldn't accept that. I wouldn't. I'm not leaving, I said firmly. Oh, and I'm not going to let you kill that girl. Reverend Quint studied me for a long moment, then sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. You're just like my daughter, you know, stubborn, principled, convinced of your own righteousness. It's an admirable quality right up until it isn't. He turned to leave and then paused. The festival starts tonight, Sunday morning. The offering will be made. You have until then to change your mind. After that, well, we take care of our own in Mercer's Hollow. But you're not one of our own, are you? He walked away, leaving me standing among the graves of young women, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I returned to the cottage and spent the afternoon trying to formulate a plan. I needed to get Cassidy out of town, needed to find some way to alert authorities, but my phone still had no signal, and I suspected the landline was monitored. The nearest town was 30 miles away over mountain roads. Without a car, I couldn't get there and back before Sunday, unless I could convince Dorian Farrell to help. As evening fell, I heard music drifting up from the town, fiddles and guitars, laughter and celebration. The festival had begun. I put on my coat and walked down the hill, drawn by equal parts dread and determination. Main Street had been transformed. Booths lined both sides, selling everything from homemade preserves to hand-carved wooden toys. A stage had been erected in front of the community center, where a bluegrass band played. People danced and ate and laughed, their earlier fear and tension seemingly forgotten. It looked like any small-town festival in America, wholesome and innocent, but I knew better now. I moved through the crowd, searching for Cassidy, for Dorian, for anyone who might help. People parted around me like water around a stone, not acknowledging my presence but clearly aware of it. Their laughter seemed forced, their smiles tight. I found Cassidy near a booth selling apple cider. She wore a white dress, the same one from the photograph in the store, and a crown of autumn flowers. People approached her, touching her arm, her shoulder, murmuring words I couldn't hear. She accepted their attention with a glazed expression, as if she'd retreated somewhere deep inside herself. I approached her, and the people around her melted away. "Cassidy," I said gently. "Can we talk?" She looked at me, and I saw a spark of recognition, of hope, quickly suppressed. "I can't. I'm not supposed to. Just for a minute, please." She glanced around nervously, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. We walked to the edge of the festival, near the shadows where the lights didn't quite reach. "You need to run," I told her. "Tonight. Now. I'll help you." "There's nowhere to run. They'd find me. They always find the ones who try to leave." She spoke in a monotone now, as if reciting memorized lines. "Not if we're smart about it. I know people in other states. People who can hide you, help you start over. You don't understand. Her composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's not just me. If I don't go through with it, the covenant breaks. The town dies. My family dies. Everyone I love suffers. Reverend Quince explained it all. This is the only way. That's manipulation, Cassidy. That's how they control you. My grandmother was the chosen one 50 years ago. She tried to run. The next day, the river flooded. 12 people drowned, including her parents. They brought her back, and she fulfilled her duty. The floodwaters receded. The town was saved. Cassidy gripped my arm. I've seen the records, the proof. Every time someone refuses, disaster strikes. Every time someone accepts, we prosper. I don't want to die, Mrs. Traoré, but I can't let everyone else die because of my cowardice. Chapter 9. I stood there, holding this terrified young woman, feeling the weight of an entire community's delusion pressing down on both of us. Because that's what it was, delusion, superstition dressed up as faith, post hoc reasoning that turned coincidence into causation. But how could I convince her of that, when she'd been raised in this belief, when an entire town reinforced it? Listen to me, I said urgently. I've seen this before, in different forms. People creating stories to explain their fears, building systems to make random tragedy feel controllable. The flood that killed your grandmother's parents, that was a natural disaster. It would have happened whether she ran or not, whether she died or not. Can't you see? They're using your love for your community to manipulate you into surrendering your life. She pulled away from me. You can't know that. You can't prove the covenant isn't real. And you can't prove it is. I can't take that chance. She wiped her tears with shaking hands. Tomorrow night, at the harvest moon ceremony, I'll drink the sacred wine. I'll fall asleep. I won't feel anything. And everyone I love will be safe for another 20 years. That's worth it. That has to be worth it. Before I could respond, strong hands grabbed my arms from behind. 2 men I recognized from the meeting, the hardware store owner and another man I didn't know, pulled me backward. That's enough, the hardware store owner said. You've upset her enough. Time for you to go home, Mrs. Traoré. I struggled against their grip. Let me go. We're escorting you home for your own safety, the other man said. These mountain roads can be dangerous at night. Wouldn't want you to have an accident. The threat was clear. I could see Reverend Quince watching from across the festival grounds, his expression unreadable. Cassidy had turned away, her shoulders shaking with sobs, immediately surrounded by other women offering hollow comfort. They walked me to the edge of town and released me, standing there until I started up the road toward my cottage. I walked cute, my mind churning with anger and despair, until I was out of sight. Then I stopped, considering my options. I could go to the cottage, pack my bags, leave like everyone wanted, save myself, let Cassidy die and tell myself it wasn't my responsibility, that I'd tried, that some fights can't be won, or I could do what I'd always done. Fight anyway, even when it seemed hopeless, even when the cost was too high. I thought of my children again, of the last time I'd seen each of them. Yasmin at Marcus's funeral, her face closed off, refusing to sit next to me. Garrett at the lawyer's office during the will contest, testifying that I'd isolated his father from the family, that I'd always cared more about those people than about my own relatives. The pain of those memories was still sharp, still fresh. Was Reverend Quince right? Had I sacrificed my family for nothing? Had all those years of activism, all those causes and campaigns and protests been a waste? No, I couldn't accept that. The work had mattered, the lives we'd changed, the injustices we'd fought, the small victories we'd won, they all mattered. Maybe my children couldn't see that. Maybe I'd made mistakes in balancing my commitments, but the cause itself had been worthy. And this cause was worthy too. I turned around and headed back toward town, moving quietly through the shadows. The festival was winding down, families heading home, lights being extinguished. I made my way to the community center, where I'd seen them take Cassidy earlier. The building was locked, but I'd learned during my activist days how to be resourceful. I found a window slightly ajar in the back and managed to lever it open enough to squeeze through, my old body protesting every movement. Inside, the building was dark and silent. I moved carefully, letting my eyes adjust, making my way toward the main hall. I could hear voices from somewhere, Reverend Quince and others, discussing preparations for Sunday's ceremony. I found Cassidy in a small room off the main hall, sitting alone on a cot, still wearing her white dress and flower crown. She looked up when I entered, her eyes widening. "How did you—" "Shh." I sat beside her. "I'm getting you out of here." "I told you, I can't—" "You can. You just need to choose to. I know it's terrifying. I know they've convinced you that terrible things will happen if you run. But Cassidy, terrible things are happening. They're going to kill you, that's certain, that's real. The rest is just stories they tell to justify it." She was crying again, but I could see something shifting in her expression, some crack in the certainty they'd built around her. "My parents, they're so proud. They keep talking about how honored they are, how I'll be remembered forever. But I see it in my mum's eyes. She's dying inside. She doesn't want this. She just can't say it out loud. Then say it for her. Choose life. Choose a future, even if it's uncertain, even if it's hard. That's what courage really is, not dying for a cause, but living despite your fear." The voices in the hall were getting closer. We were running out of time. "Come with me," I said, standing and offering my hand. "Right now. We'll go to my cottage, get a few things, and then we'll walk to the main highway. We'll flag down a truck, get to the next town, call the state police. We'll expose what's happening here, and they'll come, and this will end." She stared at my hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Chapter 10. We made it out the window and into the woods before anyone noticed. I could hear shouts behind us, flashlights beginning to sweep the area, but we were already running through the darkness, branches whipping at our faces, my lungs burning with effort. Cassidy was young and fast. I was not. She had to slow down for me, had to help me over fallen logs and through thick underbrush. We made it to the cottage, where I grabbed my purse containing my cash, my ID, Marcus's photograph, and the warmest coat I had. Cassidy was shivering in her thin white dress. "Here," I said, pulling a sweater over her head, wrapping her in my spare jacket. "It's not much, but it'll help." Lights were appearing on the road below, vehicles moving slowly up the hill. They'd figured out where we'd gone. "The back way," Cassidy said. "Through the woods. It's longer, but they might not think of it." We ran again, this time up the slope behind the cottage, into deeper forest. My legs were screaming, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I was 71 years old, and I was running for my life, for this girl's life, through dark woods in the middle of the night. It felt like old times. It felt like coming home. We climbed for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. The sounds of pursuit faded behind us as we moved deeper into wilderness. Finally, we reached a clearing near the top of the ridge, both of us gasping for breath, our hands cut from grabbing branches in the dark. "We need to keep moving," Cassidy wheezed. "So once they realize we went this way..." A light blazed in our faces, blinding us. "Going somewhere?" Dorian Farrell stood at the edge of the clearing, a flashlight in one hand. Behind him, I could see his truck parked on what must be a fire road I hadn't known existed. My heart sank. Had he been part of this all along? Had his warning been a test, a way to identify dissidents? But then he lowered the light and gestured urgently. "Get in the truck, both of you, now." We ran to the vehicle and climbed in. Dorian was already starting the engine, turning the truck around on the narrow road. "How did you know?" I asked. "I saw them mobilizing, heading to your place. Figured you'd done something stupid." He glanced at Cassidy in the rearview mirror. "You okay, girl?" She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. We drove through the darkness, the truck bouncing over ruts and rocks. Dorian knew these roads intimately, driving without headlights, navigating by moonlight and memory. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Route 9. It's about 15 miles through the backcountry too, but they won't expect it. Once we get you to the highway, you can flag down a truck, get to Bradford. There's a state police barracks there." "What about you? Won't they know you helped us?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Probably, but I've been complicit too long already. My wife, Sarah, she was chosen 35 years ago. I was young, stupid, believed what they told me. I let them take her." His voice broke. "I've lived with that for 35 years. I'm not doing it again." We drove in silence after that, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I thought about sacrifice, about the different forms it takes, about the price we pay for our choices and our inaction. Dorian had sacrificed his wife and his peace of mind. I had sacrificed my family for my principles. Cassidy had almost sacrificed herself for a lie. We were about 10 miles from the highway when we saw the roadblock. Trucks were parked across the fire road, headlights blazing. Men stood in front of them, blocking our way. Reverend Quince was there, and the hardware store owner and a dozen others. Dorian slammed on the brakes, threw the truck in reverse, but more vehicles appeared behind us. We were trapped. "Stay in the truck," Dorian said, reaching under his seat and pulling out a shotgun. "I mean it. Both of you. Stay inside and lock the doors." He got out, the shotgun held low but ready. Reverend Quince approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Dorian, don't do this. Don't throw away everything for outsiders who don't understand our ways. She's not an outsider. She's a human being. They both are. We're all human beings, trying to survive in a harsh world. You know what's at stake. You remember what happened when Sarah tried to run. You remember the blight that killed half our crops, the sickness that took 12 children. You brought her back and it all stopped. You know the covenant is real." Dorian's hands were shaking. "I was wrong. It was coincidence. Bad luck. It had nothing to do with Sarah. Then why did it stop when she fulfilled her duty? Why has the town prospered ever since?" Reverend Quince took another step closer. "As you've lived with guilt for 35 years because part of you knows the truth. The covenant is real, and if you let Cassidy go, if you break it, we all pay the price, including you." I saw the doubt on Dorian's face, the old guilt and grief warring with his newfound resolve. This was how they maintained control, not just through fear but through complicity, through making people accomplices to the horror so they couldn't escape their own responsibility. I opened the truck door. "Mrs. Traoré, no!" Dorian shouted, but I was already walking toward Reverend Quince, my old body moving with more confidence than I felt. Chapter 11. "You want a sacrifice?" I said, my voice carrying in the night air. "Sha'd take me." Reverend Quince actually laughed. "That's very noble, Mrs. Traoré, but it doesn't work that way. The chosen one must be young, must be from the community, must have roots here. You're none of those things. Then your covenant is meaningless. If it requires such specific conditions, it's not a covenant. It's just the excuse to murder young women." I moved closer, drawing his attention away from the truck. "Or maybe the truth is simpler. There is no covenant, there never was. Your ancestors started this tradition as a way to control the community through fear, and you've all been too cowardly to question it. Careful, Mrs. Traoré. You're very close to blasphemy." "I'm very close to the truth, you mean?" I gestured at the men surrounding us. "How many of you have really examined the evidence? How many of you have looked at the actual records, the timing of the supposed disasters, the prosperity that supposedly follows? Or do you just accept what you've been told because it's easier than facing the fact that you're part of something evil?" A murmur went through the crowd. Some of the men looked uncomfortable. "The flood that killed people when Sarah Farrell ran," I continued, raising my voice. "I'd be willing to bet it happened during spring snowmelt, when floods are common in these mountains. The crop blight, probably a fungus or pest that was already spreading, that would have ended on its own. The sick children, a disease outbreak that ran its natural course. You've taken normal events and created a mythology around them, and now you're so invested in that mythology that you'll kill to protect it." "Enough!" Reverend Quince's composure was cracking. "You know nothing about our community, our history. I know about communities built on fear and control. I've fought them my whole life. And I know that the people who run them are always the same. They convince others that the terrible things they do are necessary, that the sacrifices are for the greater good. But it's always the powerless who are sacrificed, isn't it? Always the young women, never the reverends or the town leaders. Convenient that the covenant requires you to maintain power. That's all this is. You control this town through ritual murder, and everyone goes along with it because they're too afraid to question, too complicit to rebel." I turned to address the gathered men directly. "When does it end? When do you say enough? How many more Cassidys, how many more Sarahs, how many more young women have to die before you admit this is wrong?" One of the younger men, someone I recognized from the festival, stepped forward. Maybe we should talk to the state authorities. Let them investigate, see if—" "No." Reverend Quince's veneer of calm completely shattered. "You will not bring outsiders into this. The covenant has protected us for 200 years. Then let it protect us without killing anyone," the young man shot back. "My daughter is 12. In 10 years, she could be chosen. I don't want that. I can't." His voice broke. Other men were nodding, murmuring agreement. The certainty that had held them in place was fracturing, but Reverend Quince wasn't done. You would risk everything on the words of this outsider, this woman who abandoned her own family, who sacrificed her children for her so-called principles. She has no right to judge our traditions? The words hit their mark. Several men who had seemed swayed looked at me with fresh suspicion, and I saw something in Reverend Quince's eyes. He was losing control. And desperate people do dangerous things. "If you won't give us Cassidy," he said quietly, his hand moving to his coat pocket, "then you leave us no choice." The gunshot seemed impossibly loud in the confined space of the mountain road. I heard Cassidy scream, felt something hot graze my arm, saw Dorian raise his shotgun. "No more!" Dorian shouted. "It ends tonight, all of it." The next few minutes were chaos. Men shouting, moving, some trying to de-escalate, others reaching for weapons. I ran back to the truck, pulled Cassidy out, and pushed her toward the woods. "Run," I told her. "Follow the road east. Get to the highway. Find help." "I can't leave you." "Yes, you can. This is your chance. Take it." I shoved her toward the darkness, and she stumbled, then ran. Another gunshot. I turned and saw Dorian on the ground, blood spreading across his chest. Reverend Quince stood over him, a pistol in his hand, his expression wild. "See what you've caused," he shouted at me. "See what your interference has done. He would still be alive if you'd just left." I knelt beside Dorian, pressing my hands against his wound, feeling his blood warm and wet. His eyes found mine. "Did she get away?" he whispered. "Yes, she's running." "Good, good," he coughed, blood on his lips. "Sarah, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her." His eyes went distant, fixed on something I couldn't see, and then he was gone. I stood slowly, my hands covered in his blood, facing Reverend Quince and his gun. Around us, the other men had gone still, shocked by what they'd witnessed. "You killed him," I said softly. "For trying to save a girl's life, you murdered him." Reverend Quince's hand was shaking, the gun wavering. "He betrayed the covenant. He betrayed all of us." "There is no covenant," I screamed, all my grief and rage pouring out. "There's just you and your need for control, and your willingness to kill anyone who threatens it. Look at him. Look at what you've done. Is this what your God wants? Is this what protects your community?" The gun lowered slowly. Reverend Quince stared at Dorian's body, at his own bloody hands, and something broke in his expression. "I didn't. I only meant to." "You meant to kill him, just like you meant to kill Cassidy. Just like you've killed how many others?" I stepped toward him, no longer caring about the gun. "It's over. Even if you kill me, even if you hunt down Cassidy, it's over. Because these men," I gestured at the crowd, "they've seen what the covenant really costs. They've seen the truth behind your rituals, and they'll never forget." The gun fell from his hand. He collapsed to his knees beside Dorian's body, making a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. Chapter 12. The state police arrived just after dawn, brought by Cassidy, who had flagged down a truck on Route 9 and convinced the driver to help her. They found her still on that mountain road, Dorian's body covered with someone's jacket, Reverend Quince under guard by the same men who had followed him hours earlier, and me sitting against a tree, exhausted and blood-stained. The investigation that followed was extensive. The FBI got involved because of the potential for human trafficking and organized crime. They exhumed graves going back decades, finding evidence that the young women had been poisoned, exactly as Cassidy had described. The sacred wine was hemlock, carefully measured to cause death that looked like peaceful sleep. Reverend Quince was charged with murder and conspiracy. So were 3 other town leaders who had actively participated in the ceremonies over the years. The trials took months, revealing a network of control that had operated in Mercer's Hollow for generations, enforced through a combination of genuine belief, fear, and social pressure. Cassidy testified. So did I. So did other townspeople who had harbored doubts but never spoken up. The defense tried to claim religious freedom, cultural tradition, but in the end, murder is murder, no matter how you dress it up. Reverend Quince was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. In his final statement, he didn't apologize or recant. He simply said that we would all see that without the covenant, Mercer's Hollow would fall. That disaster would prove him right. It's been 3 years now. The town hasn't fallen. There have been no mysterious floods, no crop blights, no epidemics. Life continues, sometimes prosperously, sometimes with hardship, just like any other small town in America. But Mercer's Hollow did change. Many families left, unable to live with the shame of what had happened, what they'd allowed. The population dropped by nearly half. The Harvest Festival was discontinued. The community center was converted into a mental health clinic, offering free counseling to anyone affected by the years of trauma. I stayed. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because Dorian had sacrificed himself to protect Cassidy, and I felt I owed it to his memory to help rebuild what his death had broken. Maybe because after a lifetime of moving from cause to cause, I was finally too tired to start over somewhere else. Cassidy stayed too. She works at the library now and she's taking online classes to become a social worker. She wants to help other young people trapped in controlling situations. Sometimes we have coffee together and don't talk about what happened. Other times we do, processing the trauma bit by bit. I tried reaching out to my children again, thinking maybe they'd see the news coverage. Maybe they'd understand that my activism came from a place of genuine care for others. Yasmin sent a brief email, acknowledging my message but saying she wasn't ready to reconnect. Garrett didn't respond at all. It hurt. It still hurts. Reverend Quince was right about that. I did sacrifice my family for my principles. I can tell myself it was necessary, that the work mattered more than my comfort or my relationships, but the loneliness is still real, still sharp. I don't regret staying in Mercer's Hollow. I don't regret fighting for Cassidy. But I do regret the choices I made years ago that cost me my children. Both things can be true. I can have been right to fight injustice and wrong in how I balanced my commitments. I can have saved lives and lost the people I loved most. That's what I've learned at 74. Sitting on the porch of the cottage I still rent, watching the mountains change with the seasons. There are no perfect choices. There are no easy answers. Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you can afford to pay, and you pay it anyway because the alternative is unthinkable. Dorian Farrell is buried in the cemetery behind the church, next to his wife, Sarah. I visit their graves once a week, bringing flowers, talking to them about the town's slow healing. I tell them that their sacrifices, the real sacrifices, the ones made by choice in service of love and justice, weren't in vain. Last week, the hardware store owner who testified against Reverend Quince and has tried hard to make amends, stopped me on the street. He told me that his granddaughter asked him about those bad times, about why people in town don't talk much about the past. He said he told her the truth, age-appropriate but honest, about how sometimes good people do terrible things when they're afraid, and how one brave woman helped them see clearly again. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve it." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, because the truth is more complicated than gratitude or blame. I didn't save Mercer's Hollow alone. Cassidy saved herself by choosing to run. Dorian saved her by choosing to help, even knowing it would cost him everything. The men who finally stood up to Reverend Quince saved their town by choosing truth over tradition. All I did was what I've always done. Refuse to look away when I saw injustice, even when looking away would have been easier, safer, smarter, even when it cost me everything. I sit on my porch tonight, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and I think about sacrifice, real sacrifice, not the kind that demands young women die for superstition, but the kind that asks us to give up our comfort, our safety, our easy certainties in service of something larger than ourselves. I think about my children, who I hope are happy, who I hope have found peace even if they'll never find it with me. I think about Marcus, whose photograph still sits on my nightstand, whose memory I carry like a weight and a blessing. And I think about Cassidy, who gets to grow old now, who gets to make her own choices and her own mistakes, who gets to live. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. Maybe it's not enough to balance the ledger of my life. Maybe I'll die alone in this cottage, estranged from my family, remembered, if I'm remembered at all, as the difficult woman who couldn't let things be. But Cassidy will remember. The young mothers in Mercer's Hollow who no longer fear their daughters will be chosen will remember, and perhaps that's enough. Not perfect, not painless, but enough. The sun dips below the mountains, and the autumn air grows cold. I go inside, make tea, sit at the kitchen table with my old notebooks filled with observations and plans and hopes. Tomorrow, the library board meets to discuss expanding their mental health resources. I've been invited to consult. There's always another fight, another cause, another injustice that needs addressing. I'm 74 now, tired in my bones, carrying losses I'll never fully recover from, but I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. The end. Lessons. This story teaches us that doing what's right often comes at a personal cost, sometimes a cost so high it can break your heart. Delphine saved Cassidy and helped break the cycle of violence in Mercer's Hollow, but she couldn't repair the relationships with her own children. The story reminds us that we can be right in our principles and still wrong in how we've prioritized our lives. It shows that communities can be complicit in terrible things when fear and tradition override moral clarity. Most importantly, it illustrates that standing against injustice is necessary even when the personal price is devastating, even when there's no guarantee of redemption, even when all you have left is the knowledge that you did what needed to be done. Sometimes the bittersweet truth is that we can't save everything or everyone, including ourselves, but we can still choose to fight for what matters.